I know some of y'all already know, and I kind of gave away some of it just now, but the MITM Club stands for Millionaires in the Making. Why is it Millionaires in the Making? Well, $1 million is going to pass through your hands throughout your lifetime. The biggest question is, how much of it will you keep? How much of it will you spend? How much of it will you make work harder than you do? And with that in mind, today's session is actually built upon one of the core pillars of MITM Club. Like, MITM Club is based on 6 pillars: self, fitness, finance, family, fun, and education. And today, we're leaning into one of the pillars of fitness through the lens of nutrition. Now, with the holidays coming up, a lot of folks are going to have some difficulties with discipline, making sure that they're sticking to their holiday goals. Okay, it's to their nutrition plans, making sure that they're blessed by the best. But today we have an amazing guest that I met quite a little while ago. She was one of our podcast guests. She runs a nutrition company. She's absolutely amazing. And I just want to welcome Natalie to today's session. Now, before we jump into having Natalie turn her camera on and start chatting with us, I just want to see what y'all said. Okay, so we got balance and we have protein as two of the biggest struggles that folks are having when it comes to their nutrition. And finding balance is actually very, very interesting. You say balance. See, sometimes when we put these things together, it's like we're already in your mind and we know what you're going through, because we're going to talk a little bit about balance today. All right. Give me one more second. I think someone else is trying to get in. All right. So we should be golden. Now, we have a couple different learning objectives. The first is to discover how to enjoy holiday foods without guilt, restriction, or losing progress. You want to learn the simple frameworks to stay consistent through every celebration. You want to build confidence and self-trust so one meal never throws you off track ever again. Never, ever again. All right. Hey, Vincent, what's up? Welcome. You may want to turn your phone sideways so you get a bit of a better view, yeah? We want to master daily habits that keep you energized, balanced, and in control. And lastly, I want you to walk away with a clear plan to finish the year strong and not start over in January. In fact, at the MITM Club, we say F January, F New Year's, because we don't want to start when New Year's is here. We want to start now. We want to start powerfully, intentionally, right now, this very moment, so we can step into the new year as a new person to make their dreams come true. And that's exactly what we're going to be doing together. Now, a lot of the time when we go and try to reach our goals or maintain our goals through the holiday season, it can feel like a tug of war. It's between the fit version of you and the fat version of you. But by the end of today's session, I know that will no longer be a problem for any of y'all. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen real quick. With that being said, drop a 1 in the chat, everybody, just to welcome Natalie to our session today. Hey, Natalie, how you doing today?
I'm doing great. I'm very happy to be here, very excited.
It's so good to have you. It's so good to have you. I just had to turn my audio back up. I could not hear it for a second. But yeah, let's hop into it. Natalie, how could you help us actually survive and thrive during this holiday season?
Well, that is the golden question, right? Because like you showed on the whiteboard, balance is something that a lot of people struggle with. And I can guarantee you that the problem isn't in the kitchen or what you eat, but it's in your mindset. It's how you relate to food. So today, we're going to really be exploring how to shift the mindset so that you can enter the holiday season feeling very balanced and aligned with your choices and being very intentional about your choices so that you are in control around the food and not the other way around. So before I dive into my whole training on it, I want to give you guys just a little bit of background in case you're wondering, like, who am I? Why am I listening to this girl? What's her deal? So I'm Natalie. I'm the owner of Align Wellness. It's an online nutrition coaching company for women. And I help women fix their relationships with food while losing fat and keeping it off permanently without removing any of their favorite foods. And so a little background with me. Used to compete in bodybuilding. And this part plays such a big role into how I handle the holidays now, because when I was doing bodybuilding, I had such a horrible relationship with food, and eventually moved into having a full-blown eating disorder of bulimia with it. And I was in like the lowest parts of my life, just mentally, physically, when I was competing. But I was so scared to let it go because I had like gripped onto that identity of being a bodybuilder and also the identity of my eating disorder too. And so a lot of times when the holidays would come around, it was such a shit show for me, like mentally and emotionally trying to navigate it, that I would intentionally plan my competitions around the holiday times so that like the last show I did was at the beginning of November. So then that way I could justify eating horribly during the holidays because in my mind I had just, prepped for 6-8 months. I'd worked my butt off. I'd earned this. And so I kind of fell into that pitfall of the justification mindset. And then, kind of fast forward a few years, recovered from, my eating disorder, stopped bodybuilding, and then found on my way in nutrition coaching online. And I've owned Align Wellness for about 2.5 years now. And I absolutely love what I do. And I really believe in the message of what I mentioned earlier of, our problems with food is just in how we relate to it. And if we can change how we relate to ourselves and how we relate to food, then we are capable of, achieving any body, any goal, anything like that. And so with today's training, with it being focused on discipline over deprivation, I want you guys to think about this as we go into it, that, a lot of times we mistake discipline for harsh restriction. It's like that relentless no to cravings and like not giving into them and just constantly like having these really rigid rules that often leave us feeling really deprived and also resentful too. And so the genuine discipline that I want you thinking of today as we kind of go through this training is I want you to think of it as a profound act of self-care and self-respect. Because when we follow through with the things that we say we're going to do, in my opinion, that is the highest form of self-respect that we can have for ourselves. And so, it's not about controlling food. It's about cultivating a deep trust in yourself to make choices that truly nourish your body and spirit, which then, allow you to enjoy life fully without constant internal battles or constantly asking yourself, like, was that the right choice? Was that bad? Am I eating too much? Am I eating too little? And so it's a conscious alignment of your actions with your deepest values for health and well-being, rather than this like punitive regime. And so, like I said, as we go through this training today, I want you to think of discipline, once again, not as a set standard of rules that you have to follow by and it, restricts you from enjoyment and fulfillment, but more so the opposite, being disciplined and doing what you say you're going to do and showing up for yourself and prioritizing what's important to you is what's actually going to help set you free. And so before we dive in, if you guys would like to in the chat, just share, you can put a 1 or whatever honestly response you want. Who here has like struggled with the holidays in the past, with whether that's not knowing how to eat, not knowing how to stick to your goals, overeating, feeling guilty afterwards? Just put a 1 in the chat if you have experienced that yourself. All right, Vincent, yeah, me too, buddy. Ty, yeah, I mean, I think we all have, because food is a very like humanity-based thing and we share a lot of similar experiences. So that's one thing to keep in mind too as we move forward, that what you feel with food, you're not alone with it. And food can be a very tricky thing, especially in today's day and age with social media where there's so much misinformation and it's hard to, sift through like what's correct, what's not correct. So just know, everybody has their own relationship with food. And ideally we want to get you to a point where your relationship with food is defined as nourishing and balanced, And so, yeah, Alan said overeating for sure. And it's a hard thing, and something that I really want to touch on today as we go through this training is reminding yourselves that it's not your fault. I feel like a lot of times when it comes to food and overeating, we tend to blame ourselves, which honestly just keeps us in like that negative feedback loop. But our body has a bunch of physiological responses to certain types of foods, environments, senses, cues, all these things. And a lot of times what we feel hunger-wise or that inability to getting tongue-tied, that inability to stop when we feel content is a lot of times due to just physiological responses. And so we're going to get into the science of it too, because I'm a really big believer that if we understand how food works in our body, we can then make informed choices around food so that once again, we learn how to say yes and no to foods based off of what we actually want and not out of, fear, guilt, restriction, peer pressure, things like that. Because another hard battle with the holidays is I feel like everybody always has stuff to say about what you're eating or what you're not eating. And that can be very hard, especially if we don't feel super confident in our food choices, or we don't know how to trust ourselves, or we don't know what the right decision is. It's very easy to be like, okay, I'm going in with this plan. I'm not going to do pumpkin pie this year, but I'm going to focus on whatever it may be. But then Aunt Susie comes in with her pumpkin pie and she's like, why aren't you eating my pie? Are you on a diet? Well, it's the holidays. It doesn't matter, And so it's very easy to lose that discipline to what we want to focus on when it is holidays, because there's a lot of peer pressure, so to speak, around food choices. So, give me a second. I'm just checking the chat real quick because it's showing me notification. Okay, yeah. So with the training, ideally at the end of this, I want you all to have a better understanding of how to have that balance and have action steps of how to actually apply this in real time. Granted though, keep in mind with Thanksgiving being right around the corner, it may not be perfect this time around, but that's okay. Because when we have moments where we don't eat how we plan to, or maybe we don't hit our macros, or we do overeat, or things like that, those are all little areas of opportunity to get feedback on how we can do better the next time. And so kind of shifting that mindset of like guilt and blame and going more towards curiosity and self-compassion, and just kind of asking yourself like, okay, why did I overeat? What circumstances led me to that? Did I skip breakfast this day? Did I have no protein? Have I drinking no water today? And just getting that feedback so that you can use that to then make informed decisions moving forward of the last time when I didn't have breakfast on Thanksgiving, I overate and felt like shit afterwards. So then next time we go around, you have breakfast. And so it's all about taking those small steps that compound to have a really big impact over time. And so with the holiday season, like the picture Ty shared, it kind of becomes just like tug of war between two identities. The person who wants to stay committed to their goals and their nutrition, and the person who just wants to enjoy the people and the food they love. Or, it can also sometimes be a season where it's hard. Holidays can be a hard time for people, and we use food for comfort. And so by January, millions are carrying not just extra weight, but extra guilt, because once again, they didn't follow through with what they said they were going to do. And every time that we don't follow through with things that we say we're going to do for ourselves, we lose a little bit of self-trust and self-confidence. And so hopefully by the end of today, you guys will have a different mindset around that, so that you can start showing up for yourself intentionally and powerfully, and start building that inner self-confidence back up to where you know that you can do these things and you know that you can do hard things. And so, like I mentioned earlier, it's not the food that derails us, but once again, the mindset. It's what we've been taught about food. It's the environment we grew up in food. One thing that was really hard for me to get over when I was like going through my eating disorder and all that stuff is I realized that I grew up in a household where my parents would guilt me into finishing my food by saying like, there's starving kids other places, like you need to finish your food. And I like to believe that our parents had good intentions with that. They just wanted us to grow big and strong. But that plays a role psychologically into how we view food. And so for a very long time, I would just finish my plate no matter if I was full, because that's what I had been trained to do essentially. And, it takes time and patience and practice to kind of rewire these types of thoughts that we've had for 10, 20 years or so. And so just remember, it's not going to happen overnight, but one small step forward is sometimes all that we need. And there is a balanced approach where, you can enjoy mashed potatoes and pie and participate in holiday traditions, but also staying connected to your body and goals. And with the holiday season, a lot of the times it's the strategy that we have, or lack thereof, that causes us to kind of spiral or overeat. Because I feel like a lot of times with at least the clients that I work with, it's like one side of the spectrum or the other, where it's like, I'm going to be so extreme and stick to my goals that I'm going to bring like my own chicken and rice to Thanksgiving and I'm going to hit my macros perfectly. Or it's the opposite side of the spectrum where it's like, you know what, fuck it, I'm just going to eat whatever I want. It's the holidays, calories don't count, right? And so hopefully I want to help you guys get from either end of the spectrum into a more balanced, nourishing, and sustainable point. And so a lot of the times there are two common but kind of self-sabotaging food strategies that most people go into, like I said, at these end of the spectrums, which is the restriction trap and then the screw it approach. And we'll start on the restriction trap side. With this strategy, it involves attempting to like save calories by eating very little or skipping meals or bringing your own food. And then that intense hunger, both physically and psychologically, overrides your willpower because that's just how our body is wired to do. And so then we kind of feel like we lose control, and that can lead to binges, whether the binge happens at the Thanksgiving dinner or you opt to take some leftovers home with you, and then in the secrecy of your own home or apartment, you binge eat on all the foods that you brought home. And so sorry, I'm getting tongue-tied. The cycle of restriction, binge, guilt creates just a super deep negative relationship with food where you keep repeating that narrative in your head that holidays are, a bad time for me because every time a holiday comes around, I binge eat or I overindulge or I overeat or I never feel good afterwards. Something that I want you guys to keep in mind too is if you believe something, you will find reasoning to make sure that that belief has proof. So if you keep telling yourself, if you keep staying stuck in that narrative of, I can never have balance in the holidays, or no matter what I do, I always end up binging, those words have power and your subconscious reacts to it. And you're going to stay stuck unless you start changing how you talk to yourself and the narrative that you want to focus on. I'll get into that a little bit more with like identity shift based things because that's a really big component to improving mindset with food. But I'll stick on, I'm kind of like getting excited and ahead of myself. I'll stick with the restriction trap right now and then we'll move on to that later. But yeah, so with the cycle of restriction and binge and guilt, it just creates this like deeply negative relationship with food where food is now an enemy or something to be feared rather than just nourishment. I mean, because at the end of the day, simply put, food is food. And if we learn how all food can nourish our body, and it's when our mind gets in the way, it becomes so much easier to make these informed decisions with food. And what I mean by that is I'm a big advocate, and a hill that I will always forever die on is there's no good or bad food. There's this food that has more nutrients in it, and there's food with less nutrients in it. Because when we start labeling food, as good and bad, we start putting moral value to food when food just simply doesn't have that. And so something that I teach my clients when they start coming to my program is focusing on, okay, how do we remove these labels from food that make us feel a negative way? And so, like I said, I encourage them to use terms like it's nutrient dense, it's not as nutrient. It's healthier, it's not as healthy. Because once again, those types of adjectives and descriptives don't have that moral value that we attach ourselves to, like good and bad. And so at the end of the day, our body is designed to digest food and break it down into its building blocks and use it for energy to support our life. And our body, like whether you're having pumpkin pie or you're having, lean chicken and rice, your body's still going to digest it the same way that it knows how to. Like I said, it's going to break it down with the pie. It's going to break it down into glucose, which will go into your cells for energy, and the extra amount will get stored as glycogen and be used later on. And then same thing, with the protein, that'll get broken down into amino acids and go to your muscles and cells as well. And so at the end of the day, your body doesn't really differentiate between, is it a pumpkin pie that I'm eating or is it chicken? It's just going to do what it knows to do with the nutrients that are provided with it. But the problem is when we start thinking that was bad, I shouldn't have done that, or I ate too much, or, any negative emotions with that, because we have this really, really cool process in our body called our vagus nerve and our enteric nervous system. And it's essentially our enteric nervous system is one of the many nervous systems that we have, but that nervous system is just for brain and gut communication. So it's like a one-way street just for those two to communicate with each other. And what happens is the emotions that we think and the things that we tell ourselves, those thoughts actually travel down through chemical messaging from our brain to our gut. And then our gut gets that feedback. And it's like, okay, well, the food that our human just ate, they're saying that this is bad. So should we just digest it quickly out and store it so that it doesn't go to the important cells and organs and muscles? And so literally the thoughts that you think around food affect your digestion. Something I encourage you to think of is, I don't know about you guys, but I definitely have had moments where I'm sitting in traffic trying to get somewhere and I get frustrated in the car, like usually in the morning, and that's shortly after breakfast. And then there'll be times where I'll be frustrated because everyone's driving slow or it's, I'm running late, whatever it may be. And I'm sitting there and all of a sudden, like, I can feel like anxiousness in my stomach, or I can feel like my stomach kind of moving food faster along. And that's because it's a response to that stress or the stressor of sitting in traffic. And so the emotions and the thoughts that we think and feel actually affects how our body uses food, absorbs nutrients, and digests the food out. So something to keep in mind as you go through the holiday season is just asking yourself, or focusing more so on the fact that you can control your emotions. I know sometimes it's hard. I struggle with controlling my emotions sometimes, but at the end of the day, no one can make us feel what we don't want to feel. And that goes for us in our brain too. I'm a big believer that our brain sometimes wants to self-sabotage us and be our worst critic. But at the end of the day, I can control how I talk to myself, and I can control how I think about myself and the choices that I do. And so, if the main thing you take away from today when you're, attending Thanksgiving or Hanukkah, Christmas, whatever it is that you celebrate, remind yourself that if you start to feel negative emotions around what you ate, I know it's a lot easier said than done, but try and let it go. Take a few deep breaths to calm your nervous system and bring forth your parasympathetic nervous system, which is the one responsible for digesting, calmness, healing. Take a few deep breaths and then just remind yourself, okay, I know if I stay in this negative headspace, I'm just going to make things worse, and I deserve better. And I can make choices that allow me to feel better because I'm capable, and then move on. So kind of got on a little side note with that too, but going back to the restriction trap, kind of an example of this, and I don't know if you guys have done this before, if you want to share in the chat that you have. A lot of times I see it, and I used to do it myself too, where it's Thanksgiving and we've got that early dinner, or at least with my family we usually eat around like 2-3 p.m. And so it's like, well, I'm just not going to eat at all today because I want to overeat on Thanksgiving. I want to save up my calories, so to speak. The problem with this thought process and these actions is your body is essentially going to go past hunger and get into starving. And then the moment that you smell food, you see food, your brain is going to start sending so many signals to your gut and everything to just eat whatever because it wants food. And so what can happen is your hunger hormone, specifically ghrelin, which is responsible for telling you that you're hungry, is going to get pushed out faster and more intensely than it normally would if you ate, periodically. And so I would definitely encourage this holiday season eating breakfast, but doing it intentionally. And so what I mean by that is protein is a big indicator for how our hunger hormones get regulated throughout the day. It kind of sets the tone for the day. And a lot of times we skip it. Or, growing up when I lived with my parents, we'd have cinnamon rolls for breakfast, and just cinnamon rolls, nothing else, which is fine. Cinnamon rolls are great. I still love them, but I'm just having sugary, fast digesting carbs first thing in the morning. So of course my hunger hormones and my cravings are going to get skewed for the rest of the day because I'm not providing my body with the nutrients it needs to set the hunger hormones in a regular fashion. And so with focusing on protein in the morning, like I said, it helps with those hunger hormones, but it also helps with preventing that starving sensation later, because protein is a very slow digesting nutrient, so it has a lot of satiation effect for you. And so what I would recommend trying out this year, especially if you do this in the past where you normally skip breakfast, I see Rochelle, you said you're guilty of doing this, try and have a high protein breakfast with some veggies. And if you're gonna have a lot of carbs at Thanksgiving, then maybe do fruit for your carbs or veggies, things like that, so that way, in a sense, you're still saving up a little bit, but you're still supporting your body. So then that way, mindset wise, going into Thanksgiving, you have that mindset of, okay, you know what, regardless of how this meal goes today, I know that I prioritize myself, my goals, my nutrition, and my digestion first thing in the morning. Because with Thanksgiving based foods, a lot of the times there's not a lot of fiber in it. So digestion can definitely get messed up with it. Carbohydrates actually can cause a lot of digestive issues when consumed at large quantities. So, by having protein in the morning and some fiber through veggies and things like that, like I said, you're essentially setting your body up for better decision making, better hunger regulation, and better digestion. My go-to meal for Thanksgiving days is usually just an egg white omelet with a bunch of peppers and onion, a little bbit of cheese, and then I like fruit on the side. And so that's kind of how I structure it, because once again, I know that, what about intermittent fasting until it's time? So It would honestly depend. I personally don't coach on intermittent fasting for my clients. A few reasons. One, a lot of the people I'm working with tend to come from a background of over restricting food. And so by trying to heal relationship with food, we can't keep them in the same process that led to that restriction aspect. And then the other part too is I work a lot with women, and there is a lot of research showing that intermittent fasting can do more damage to hormones for women. So with the intermittent fasting, if it's something that you're already doing and it does work for you and you like it, then I would say continue with it, but just be mindful of the sensory overload that's going to happen when you go to an event like Thanksgiving dinner or Christmas dinner, because there's so many good smelling foods and they're very visually appealing. So those things play a role into how our mind perceives what it wants to eat and how it sends out hunger hormones. So like I was saying, if you do intermittent fasting already and it works well for you and you like it and you're in a good headspace with food too, then stick with what you do, but just go into that Thanksgiving dinner being intentional about the awareness of it may be easy to overeat my allotted calories for the day because of these meals, so I'm still going to be intentional with my choices. I'm still going to assess what I really want to eat. Which kind of brings me into that segue of being intentional with your choices. Earlier on, I mentioned learning how to say yes and no to foods based off of what you actually want. And so a lot of times when we do come from restrictive eating, we tend to eat with our eyes, so to speak. Also, I'm sorry if you can hear my dogs barking in the back. But we tend to eat with our eyes because we've been telling ourselves for so long that, carbs are bad or desserts are bad or whatever it may be that we've been telling ourselves. So then when we see it, we kind of go into this headspace of like, well, you know what, whatever, I'm just going to eat it all today. I'm going to eat as much as I can today because it's Thanksgiving, and then tomorrow I'll get back to what I'm doing. But a lot of times that kind of keeps you in that like restriction trap of of the cycle of restrict, binge, guilt, which then kind of translates into like the screw it approach where it's like, you know what, whatever, I already fell off my diet, I already ate more than I need to, it's the holidays, I'm just gonna do whatever and eat whatever and I'll just deal with it tomorrow, which leaves you oftentimes feeling like shit. And then when we feel bad, we tend to have a tendency to self-sabotage even more so and stay once again in a cycle of like all or nothing thinking. And so when it comes to structuring how to eat for Thanksgiving, the first one is definitely to plan ahead without obsessing. And so instead of just, winging it, go in it with intention. So decide what foods you want to enjoy ahead of time. And so like for me personally, I'm from New Mexico. So chili is a really big thing here. And my absolute favorite meal or part of the meal is mashed potatoes with red chili. And so that is my all-time favorite. So I'm definitely going to go into Thanksgiving being intentional about getting myself a serving of that, because I know if I don't end up eating it, I'm going to be thinking about it the whole time. And I'm going to get into that screwed approach where it's like, you know what, I'm just going to fill my whole plate with mashed potatoes and red chili instead of just having a portion of it. And so think about what you really enjoy and what you really want to eat, and then just plan it into your meal for that day. So, you choose your priorities and build around them. And so with this kind of proactive approach, it just helps you navigate the meals and the gatherings more so with confidence and, minimizing impulsive regret-filled choices later. And so there's nothing wrong with, asking people what's going to be served at Thanksgiving. If you're going somewhere where it's being hosted, ask the host just like, hey, do you have an idea of like what foods are going to be served? And you can just leave it at that. You don't have to over explain why. If you're going to a restaurant for Thanksgiving, you can also check the menu beforehand and just identify what options are going to align best with what you want to get out of that meal. And since you guys are here, I'm assuming what you want to get out of that meal is balance. You want to not feel horrible after the holidays and, not gain weight and things like that, but you also want to be present and enjoy the food and enjoy the social connection. And there is a way to have that. And so, plan ahead, ask about what types of foods are going to be served. If for some reason you can't find out what type of foods are going to be served, then you take that control into your hands and bring a healthy dish. So then that way you at least know there's one choice at, the potluck dinner or the Thanksgiving dinner that aligns with what you want to focus on. So, that could be like a healthy appetizer, a healthy side dish. I mean, you could even do like a healthier based dessert, salad, things like that. So then once again, at least you have that option to be anchored to in aligning with your goals. And so by deciding what dishes you enjoy most ahead of time, and then plan to have reasonable portions of those. And then let me see real quick with the chat real quick. So with Thanksgiving comes leftovers for the next few days. It does if you want it to. I personally will sometimes take a little bit of leftovers, usually just the foods that I like. So I'll take turkey and I'll take mashed potatoes. And then if I'm having that the next day, technically I'm still within my goals because I practice intuitive eating, which focuses on listening to what the body is telling you, interpreting those cues, and making informed decisions around food. And so that always, for me, structures with having a plate that has vegetables, a protein source, a carb source, and a fat source. And so, since mashed potatoes have, potatoes, carbs, but a lot of times they have milk and butter too, I'll kind of group mashed potatoes into like my carb and fat sources. And then the turkey is my protein. And since turkey isn't as lean of a cut as like chicken breast is, that will also kind of contribute to my fat source. And then I'll just have veggies with it. And so in that way, I'm still sticking to my goals even afterwards, but I'm just being intentional about the leftovers that I take. There's also been a few times too where the only leftovers that like my family had was like stuffing or yams, which I don't like those foods. So I just, kindly tell them, no, I'm okay. I don't want the leftovers, but, thank you. And then Rochelle asked, what about caloric intake? I know this differs for men and women and other factors, but they say 2,000 is the average caloric intake. Is this accurate? Dining out, I know most meals are far more than. So great question. And yes, it does differ based off women and men. The 2,000 average caloric intake is, in the easiest way explained, it's not very accurate. It's a generalized statement that the FDA has to make on nutrition labels for their food labels and for the, the macros and the ingredients and stuff that are listed on it. It differs very significantly person to person. There can be, for instance, like Thai may need, I don't know, like 2,500 calories. I personally need about 1,800 on non-training days and then about 2,200 on training days. And so it really just depends on your height, your weight, your age, if you're on medications, if you have any autoimmune issues, because like for instance, women who have PCOS, their metabolic rate is about 300 calories below what a woman without PCOS is. I said medications, metabolic history. So what I mean by metabolic history is if you're someone who is constantly doing fad diets, constantly restricting and under eating, your metabolism is going to be operating at a slower rate than someone who doesn't. And then activity levels, there's a lot that goes into caloric intake. And so, because the FDA, they can't know that information. So they put 2,000 as kind of like a generalized, for most adults, it's a pretty good amount of calories. So it's not super accurate. And, like I mentioned, it's very specific to your body and also your goals too. And dining out, most meals are far more than 2,000 calories. Yes, that is true. A lot of restaurants will use lots of oils, which isn't necessarily like a bad thing either, but it is something to be aware of. Like you will significantly have higher fat intake at restaurants just due to how they prepare food because they want the food to taste super good for you. So, even if you get a side of roasted vegetables, I guarantee you that most restaurants probably cook their vegetables in butter, which same thing, butter's not bad for you. But when you consume a lot of it consistently, then that's kind of when it gets into that not as healthy of option. But yeah, most restaurants do tend to have high caloric intake for their meals. Something that's really cool though with like this health trend that we're on right now as a society is most restaurants, especially if they're a chain restaurant, has nutrition menus online. They don't market it in the restaurant, obviously, but if you go online, you can literally find at least I don't know if this percentage is actually accurate, but like 80% of chain restaurants will have nutrition menus. You just have to specifically say like, I'm trying to think of what a popular restaurant is. I don't know, Chick-fil-A. Let's say you go on Chick-fil-A online and you just type in Chick-fil-A nutrition menu, the whole nutrition menu will pop up for you. And so that's what planning ahead can help with, because instead of making a decision, in the drive-through line or in the restaurant, you take the 2-3 minutes it takes to pull up the nutrition menu and just kind of look at like, okay, what has the highest amount of protein, what's got some fiber in it, and whatever else aligns with your goals. I keep mentioning protein because honestly, protein is king. It's the one macro that our body cannot make on its own. And so it's like the main essential macronutrient. And it's also, a lot of people tend to undereat protein, especially women, which I haven't looked into like why women are always significantly undereating protein. But yeah, so that's why I keep mentioning protein. And also protein helps with keeping you fuller for longer. It helps with muscle development, all those great things. So yeah, I teach my clients when they go out to eat to look at, once again, what's going to have high protein intake, what's going to have some veggies, and then what type of carb and fat source do they want with it, and is it within the caloric amount that we've figured out for them. So great question. Going back to kind of the planning aspect of Thanksgiving or the holidays. So kind of like we talked about earlier, don't skip meals unless you're intermittent fasting and that's working for you. Fuel strategically. So, once again, kind of skipping breakfast to save calories is one of the fastest ways to trigger overeating later. And that's just a physiological response that our body has put in place as a protection method. A lot of the things when it comes to food and how our metabolism works is just our body's way of trying to keep us safe and alive. And our body is fantastic. It's so great. It does a lot of amazing things, but at some point it hasn't fully evolved to the point where it recognizes that like the calories that I'm not eating right now or the food that I'm restricting is intentional, not because there's, scarcity of food and we won't be fed type of thing. Going into like physiological and psychological aspects, consistent meals or eating consistently really helps to regulate blood sugar, which prevents extreme dips that can then trigger hunger hormones like ghrelin, the one I mentioned earlier. A way to remember this, it's kind of silly, but ghrelin, it kind of sounds like grr and your tummy grumbles when you're hungry. So that's a fun little way you can try and remember it. And then the other hunger hormone that's most popular is leptin. That's your satiation hormone. So that tells you when you're satisfied, when you've had enough food. But psychologically, when we skip food or miss meals or don't eat till, 5 p.m. or things like that, it's the opposite. When we eat, it reinforces a steady, balanced approach to eating and keeping that blood sugar level, which prevents you from hitting that all or nothing mindset. And so when it comes to blood sugar too, I'm not going to go too in depth with this, but basically if we don't eat food throughout the day, basically pretend this is the blood sugar level, it's going to dip. And it's going to dip pretty significantly, and it's going to keep dipping because it's trying to trigger the brain to get you to eat food. Because it's like, hey, we're dropping, our blood sugar's low, we need more food. And then if we ignore that, whether it's intentional or not, whatever it may be, it's going to keep kind of continuing to dip. And then the moment that we eat, it's going to spike super high. And so blood sugar fluctuations are normal and okay, but when we have super low dips and super high spikes, that's what causes a lot of overeating and hard control with food, because when our blood sugar is dipping super low, it tells the brain like, oh my gosh, we need food right now. And the brain goes, okay, I'm going to tell the human to have, an easy digesting carb source, because carbs are the fastest type of nutrient. Well, let me say this with a caveat. Simple digesting carbohydrates, so ones that are like one sugar molecule structure, digest super quick. Actually, we even start digesting carbs the moment that it enters our mouth with this little enzyme that just helps digest food called amylase. So, but like all the other foods, they start digesting once they get into our stomach and our intestines. But with carbs, it literally starts digesting and breaking down for energy the moment that it hits our mouth. And so because of that, our brain knows that, and our brain is smart, and it's kind of like kept little memories stored of like what types of foods we like and what works well for energy. And so it kind of goes into its little filing cabinet and, it goes through all the carbs, and it's like, last time our human had a donut, that helped bring the blood sugar up nice and high. Let's signal for our human to have a donut. And so because that donut is full of simple carbohydrates, once again, meaning it's just got one sugar molecule structure in it, it breaks down super fast. And then let's be real, a lot of times when our blood sugar is low, we kind of get a little cranky, we might get a little hangry, and so our mood isn't good either. And our brain once again knows that the donut that we had last time we ate it, it went into the middle part of our brain and it triggered the pleasure-seeking part of our brain, and it kind of lit it up like a slot machine. And it was like, this is amazing. And the combination of the carbs and the sugar and the texture and the fats in that donut helps release it helps make dopamine into your brain and releases it throughout the body. So when we eat foods that are physically designed to manipulate our brain chemistry, so we eat more of it, that like our brain really holds on to that, because not only is it giving us quick energy, but it's also making us feel better. So in our brain's mind, it's like, oh, this is a win-win. Let's always go for this. So it's learned that, hey, when my humans blood sugar drops. If I tell it to eat a donut, it's going to spike up and we're going to feel great. And that's why a lot of times when we have blood sugar that drops way too low, and obviously this is not consistent with accuracy for people with diabetes, but when it drops super low and stuff, that's why a lot of times we tend to have cravings for more carb-based foods or sugar-based foods. Because once again, it's a learned behavior and pattern that our brain has catched onto over the years of however long you've been doing that for. And so I would just, recommend kind of once again having breakfast if that aligns with your nutrition goals. Depending on when you're having your Thanksgiving dinner or Christmas dinner, you could do a lunch, like a very light lunch, once again, kind of focusing on protein. So maybe that's like a chicken salad with like a light vinaigrette with it. But if you're having the dinner kind of earlier, then of course, it's kind of your discretion on whether lunch is necessary or not. And then also snacks too, We can make snacks very healthy and very, protein focused. You can do veggies and hummus. You can do protein sticks like the meat sticks. You can do, meat and cheese, things like that. So definitely being intentional leading up to the meal and also intentional with your choices going into the meal. And so when it comes to building a holiday plate that feels balanced and non-restrictive, think about the size of a plate. What I always recommend and coach my clients on is half the plate should be vegetables. And then the other half should be split into 2 quadrants. The first quadrant being, protein, and then the second quadrant being carbs and favorites. And so then this way you get a plate that supports what your body needs, fuel-wise and nourishment-wise, but then you're also giving yourself the permission to enjoy some of your favorite foods. And by focusing on it being on your plate, you're hopefully being intentional about your serving sizes too. And so with serving sizes, remember, you can always go back for seconds if you are still hungry after eating your first plate. But a lot of times with Thanksgiving specifically, we tend to pile up our plate so much with so many foods. Because once again, most of the time we haven't had breakfast, we haven't eaten anything today, our eyes are bigger than our stomach is signaling to our brain that we are starving, and our brain's just pushing out hunger hormones. And once again, all the sensory cues of the food and the smell and the colors and things overwhelms our brain. And so it's very easy to just pile food on top of our plate and then go sit down with it and then be halfway through and kind of lean back in the chair and be like, oh my gosh, that was so much. I'm so full. I can't have another bite. But then we look at our plate and our brain, at least for me, my brain is like, well, you're not supposed to waste food. You're supposed to clear your plate. So just have one more bite. It won't hurt. And then you keep saying that until the whole plate is cleaned. And so something that kind of helped me be okay with leaving food on my plate is the thought process of, I'm not a garbage disposal. I'm not meant to just shovel up food. I respect myself to stop when I'm satisfied. And that was kind of a little mantra that a therapist had taught me when I was dealing with my eating disorder. And that really resided well for me and stuck with me. And something with that too is, if you don't finish your plate, you can always take it home. It doesn't mean just because you don't finish it, you have to throw it away and, waste food that way. You can always take it home and have it for later. But by starting with a smaller portion size, you're giving yourself the opportunity to decide, do I want more food? Am I content? Did I eat enough? And you're putting into practice in real time, identifying those satiation cues, which tell you like, okay, I'm content, I've had enough. Because there's, at least for me, I hate the feeling of being so full that I can't move or things like that. And so by focusing on, okay, I know I'm going to have mashed potatoes, I know I'm going to have turkey, I know I'm going to have some green beans. Let's start with smaller portions. And then once I finish, wait a few minutes. And if I'm still hungry, then I can go back and always get more food. And so when we're actually eating the meal, a few things to keep in mind that can really help with this is practicing eating mindfully. So the goal is to not inhale our food, but to actually enjoy it. And so by eating slowly, you're actually giving your body time to register your fullness, and it helps you kind of savor your food a little bit more. And so it's actually recommended that most people eat for about 15 to 20 minutes per meal, because that's how long it takes for the body to register that it's full. Because think about it this way, we have our stomach, and let's say when our stomach's empty, it's like this big. And are kind of similar to what I was talking about earlier with like our brain storing memories and cues and things like that, so does our stomach. And so our stomach has all these nerve endings on it. And it's learned over time, like what size it has to stretch to that meets the nutritional needs, or I guess the fullness needs more so of what your body requires to be content. And so let's say your stomach starts here And it's learned that if it stretches to here, that's where it feels good. That's enough. And so those nerve endings, once again, go up the enteric nervous system and communicate to the brain that it's had enough. And so when we eat slowly, we allow for our stomach to grow in the size that it needs to until it reaches that satisfaction point and not overeat. And so, some very silly but impactful tips. Number one, when you're eating, just put your silverware down in between bites. I can't tell you how many times I've caught myself where I'm like eating something and I have the fork in my hand or something, and as I'm chewing or listening to someone talk, I'm like subconsciously scooping food back onto my fork and then putting it in my mouth before I'm even finished chewing like my first bite. And so a very easy way to kind of slow down is just after you take a bite, just put your silverware down. If you're eating a handheld food and it's messy and you don't want to like put it down and get your hands away from it, just move it away from your mouth, because then that allows you to fully chew and swallow before going on to the next bite. And so another thing too is when you're eating, try and engage your senses. So, notice the colors, the aromas, and the textures of your food before taking a bite. Not only will that help you slow down, but it'll also help you savor your food a little bit more and make it a more enjoyable experience. The chewing thoroughly, I'm sure some of you have probably been told by your mother at some point to chew for, 20 to 30 bites. But seriously, that really does help break down the food more so that it's easier on your digestive system, but it also slows you down more. And it, allows your body to process the food and your brain to recognize the signals of satisfaction, because chewing is part of the digestive system that actually tells you or starts telling the body like, okay, we're getting there. Like it all kind of works together in a very holistic way, from chewing to swallowing to it sitting in your stomach. And then this one can sometimes be a little hard with the holidays, but try and minimize distractions. This one's more so, at least outside of the holidays. A lot of us are iPad kid babies where we just need like TV screens or, want to watch our show during our meals and stuff. But I would encourage you, as you try and develop this skill, to just turn off screens and just focus solely on your meal. And eventually you can integrate screens back in, but by just taking a step away and kind of seeing how quickly you eat or how the food feels or tastes without distractions, it can be really helpful feedback for you moving forward. And then with satiety or, satiation, that fullness, by eating slow, you're allowing a crucial hormone like leptin, the one I mentioned earlier that tells you that you're satisfied, and another one called cholecystokinin. I honestly don't know if I'm pronouncing that right, but it's abbreviated as CCK. It allows it to be released into your body. And so it signals to your brain that you're full. And this process, like I mentioned earlier, usually takes about 15 to 20 minutes from the start of your meal. And so rushing your food tends to lead you to overeating because your body doesn't have the time to send those satiety signals. So, you're at that, like, let's say this is what your stomach grew to and it's at this satiation point. If we're eating too quickly, it's very easy to eat to where our stomach grows too much. And that's what leaves that really bloated, distended feeling and that feeling of uncomfort and like, oh my God, I'm so full. It's because we ate too fast and we ate past the point of where our stomach feels content. And then, just checking in with hunger cues too, and fullness cues, which this can sometimes be a little hard if it's not something that we've been working on. A lot of people lose the ability to kind of tune into their hunger cues at some point in their life, whether that's just because, you're working a job where you don't, like, think of nurses, they may get 5 minutes for a lunch break and they go to start eating, and then, they get called away to a patient and they didn't eat. And so that affects how the body interprets and sends off hunger cues. Or, if you were like me growing up with parents who, wanted you to clear a plate and things like that, I stopped learning how to tell when I was full, because in my mind, fullness meant my plate was clean, not what I felt. And so hunger cues, feel differently for everybody. And we've got, physiological hunger cues and psychological hunger cues. And physiological is the need for food, where psychological is more of a desire or a want for a specific type of food. And so with hunger cues and with identifying when you're hungry and when you're satisfied, what I would recommend is leading up to Thanksgiving, just try and start tuning into your body a little bit more. Just try and identify, like, am I feeling anything in my stomach or in my head? Sometimes people's hunger cues, it's more of a headache than a stomach thing. Because think about it this way, let's say for the sake of this example, your hunger cues are in being released in units. And so let's say it's Monday morning, bright and early, you wake up and your stomach's like, ooh, we're awake. We haven't eaten since 5 p.m. last night. We are hungry. Let's get some food. Send out 5 units of ghrelin so that our human feeds us. And let's say, maybe you overslept and you're running late and you're like, I don't have time for breakfast. I'll figure it out later. But then you get to work and you start diving into work and you get busy and people are, demanding things of you and all this stuff, and you just forget to eat. And so what happens is the body learns that, and the body does not like to waste energy, and it takes energy to make these hunger hormones. So then next time your body's going to be like, okay, well, our human didn't feed us when we sent out 5 units of ghrelin. So tomorrow let's send out 4 and see what happens. And then let's say the same thing happens. Maybe you just next morning didn't realize that you didn't go grocery shopping, you don't have food, same thing. You're just like, whatever, I'll figure it out later. Then your body's like, okay, well, he's not doing it with 4 units either. So let's drop down to 2. And then it just gets very hard to fill them. Like your hunger hormones are still going to be released. They're still going to be there. But the less and less you actually eat when you're hungry and stop when you're content, the more your body stops putting energy towards making those hunger hormones. And so first off, I would recommend trying to eat at regular times throughout the day. So like every 3 to 5 hours, and figuring out, do smaller, more frequent meals feel better for you? Or do 3, bigger meals feel better for you? And try and focus on just eating regularly. And what you might notice is if you're someone who normally skips breakfast, it might feel uncomfortable to eat breakfast. Like you might feel full. And so we don't want to get into a point where we're force feeding. So instead, just have a few bites of food, just a little something to trigger to your brain that, oh, we're eating breakfast again. We need to release hunger cues to support this digestion. And then with identifying your satiation cues, during your meal, just kind of pause midway and just check in, just see like, how am I feeling on a scale of 1 to 10? Where's my current state? Usually our content state or our satiation state is usually about like 7 to 8 on the scale, give or take. And just kind of see like, yeah, no, I feel good. Honestly, I'm not sure. Wait a few minutes then. And just start getting curious about what's going on in your body and how it's responding when you eat food and when you eat certain amounts. I like to tell my clients to kind of think of themselves just like an experiment, and you just are trying different things to see what yields the results that you want. And so with the holiday gatherings coming up, start with smaller portions and allow yourself to sample various dishes without overcommitting. If you want to try something, just get a little bit and try it. And if you like it, go back and get more. If you don't like it, don't have more. Or better yet, don't even finish what you did put on your plate. Prioritize conversation with family and friends, and connection over just the constant eating. That can really help you slow down. I know, like I mentioned earlier, try and minimize distractions. But with holidays, it's a little bit differently because I don't know about you, but like when I'm out with friends eating and stuff, as you can probably tell so far, I'm a yapper. And I will just talk and I'll like be maybe a quarter into my meal and I'm like, wow, I'm actually pretty good right now. So sometimes having conversations can be helpful for the practice of slowing down. And then also, if you're going somewhere where it's like a food buffet or like all the foods in the kitchen lined up pretty, try to avoid standing directly next to it because it reduces that unconscious grazing, which I'm pretty sure everybody has done at some point, where you go to a house for Thanksgiving or you're even cooking a meal and without even thinking about it, you're just like snacking on what you're making or you're snacking on what's there. Because once again, it's a learned behavior that has happened over time. At some point in your life, you went to a party or a holiday buffet or things like that and started snacking without even realizing why you were doing it, and it becomes a learned behavior. Let me check the chat real quick. Ty 100% me. And so with some other things with like the moderation and not deprivation aspect, once again, you don't need to say no to every dessert or beloved holiday dishes, and you can say yes with intention. And this is where empowered choices come from, of once again, saying yes to foods based off of what you actually want and saying no to foods based off of what you actually want. And being so confident in your decision that it can't be changed. There's been times in the past when I was first navigating, my relationship with food and trying to heal it after my eating disorder, where I had to learn how to say yes to a lot of foods that I would normally say no to, because I had to learn to trust myself around those foods again and view them as not bad. And so there were times where like, a friend would be like, hey, do you want to go out? There's a really good cookie shop here in my town. And she'd be like, oh, do you want to go get cookies? And normally I would say no, but I had to learn to say yes to then be able to make that informed decision in the future of, do I actually want this or not? And so by learning how to say yes and no to foods based off of your goals, how you want to feel, and what you actually want, kind of unlocks that confidence and that empowerment of, I'm making this decision for me and no one can change my mind about it. And so saying yes with intention, moderation is all about just making conscious choices that align with your overall health goals while still allowing for enjoyment and flexibility. Because if you're only eating clean all the time, I bet, or at least when I'll speak from personal experience. When I was eating clean and doing my bodybuilding diet, which with the coach I was with, not the best of coach, learned that the hard way, but the diet he had me on was literally breakfast, lunch, and dinner, Monday through Friday, was 4 ounces of tilapia. I got nothing else. It was just freaking fish, and I've hated fish ever since. But it was just tilapia or salmon for every single meal and nothing else with it. And then on the weekends, we would carb cycle me. And so in my mind, I was like, oh my gosh, I'm so healthy because I'm literally eating nothing but lean fish. But little did people know, behind the scenes, on my weekends where I'd get carbs and stuff, I'd be, sorry if this is graphic, I'd be running to the bathroom to throw up afterwards because in my mind, I thought if I ate these foods, I couldn't stay lean. I couldn't stay clean. And I prided myself on, once again, that identity of I'm someone who eats so clean. My relationship with food is so healthy because I eat nothing but lean protein. But then when I kind of, remove those lenses and realize how unhealthy my relationship with food was, it was wow, that was not healthy at all. Being extreme on either end of the scale isn't healthy because it's not balanced. And so, now I'm at a point where, I was at a pumpkin carving party last night where, I had some cookies and then I had, some chili and meat and lots of lettuce, and I felt really great and I didn't feel overfull afterwards, and I got to enjoy, the foods that my friend provided and, eat the desserts that I liked, and woke up feeling great today. Because something that I would strongly encourage you guys to start asking yourself before you make decisions, and not just with food, but in general, is this going to help future me? Or is this going to support future me? Because that's who we're doing this for. The choices and the actions that we take today shape our tomorrow and that future version of us. And I don't know about y'all, but I want future me to be healthy, and I want future me to be happy and to be nourished, and I want her to be able to enjoy food without obsessively thinking about it or slipping back into an eating disorder. And so I want my choices to align with that, because I've realized through my journey of, healing from my eating disorder and stepping into business ownership and all these things, that I'm capable of doing what I say I'm going to do because I have all this proof to back it up. I'm capable of healing and I'm capable of nourishing myself. And it's because of how I talk to myself, and it's because of that narrative, and it's because of the identity that I'm trying to step into, which is the healthiest and happiest version of myself. And I want to make sure that my choices align with that, because I have a very strong reasoning for those goals. I've got a very strong connection, emotional connection to those goals, and I don't want to let me down, because I've let me down before and it feels pretty shitty. And so that's just something you can start asking yourself on a day-to-day basis that can translate into food as well. Is this choice going to make future me feel her best or feel his best? Ty and I talked about this on the podcast that we did a while ago, but one thing that I started integrating into my day-to-day routine is just doing one small thing with intention that I do normally already, but just shifting the intention so it's I tell myself when I'm doing it, oh, this is going to make future Nat so happy. And it feels silly at first, but now it's I've essentially Pavloved myself, where automatically I just go to saying it whenever I'm doing it. And it's a simple action of prepping my coffee machine the night beforehand so I don't have to do it in the morning. And so every time that I'm getting my coffee ready, I'm literally telling myself, Nat's going to love this. I'm just in my kitchen scooping my coffee into the machine, just talking to myself saying, you know what, future Nat's going to love this tomorrow morning. And it's crazy how something so simple like that bleeds into all the other aspects of our life when it comes to, making choices and prioritizing ourselves. It's literally just shifting that intention. Because beforehand, I would prep it ahead of time, but I didn't take the moment to say, you know what, I actually really appreciate this in the morning. There's nothing that makes me happier in the morning than getting out of bed and my coffee's ready, because it's a timer-based one. And it's just wow, that small action of past love really sets the tone for the future me. And so kind of got sidetracked again, but going into, continuing with like the moderation aspect, be intentional with your indulgences, so choose foods that you genuinely desire, that you really enjoy. Like I personally hate pumpkin pie, so I'm not going to be having any pumpkin pie this Thanksgiving, and no one can change my mind about that. And so, rather than just like mindlessly consuming whatever is available, remember, the choices you make around your nutrition can be a form of self-love and self-respect. And me personally, I work hard for my body. I work hard for my health. And so I'm going to make sure that 90% of the food that I eat aligns with that, because I respect and love myself enough to make sure I'm setting myself up for success so that I can keep becoming that better and healthier version of me. And so with those intentional indulgences, focus on quality over quantity, so opt for a small portion of a high quality, truly delicious food instead of a large amount of something that you don't really love. I can't tell you how many times we eat things that we don't actually want to eat just because it was handed to us, or just because someone said we should try it, or just because someone put it on our plate. And then we're like, well, it's already here, we might as well finish. You deserve better than that. You deserve better choices for yourself. And then prioritizing too, if there's multiple foods that you enjoy and you love, pick your favorites, put them on your plate. Remember, start with smaller portions and then pass on the others that you're not super thrilled about. And with the emotional versus physical aspect of it, it's important to kind of like distinguish between a fleeting craving or a desire driven by just it's available. And so, kind of just asking yourself, like, is this a physical hunger for the specific food or an emotional response? Am I stressed? Is it social pressure? Things like that. And once again, regardless of what decision you make, the fact that you're starting to get curious and asking yourself, like, what do I want? How am I feeling? Really goes a long way with bringing back like your ability to identify your hunger cues and make those informed decisions. And so another thing that you can start practicing today is responding to food stimulus instead of reacting. And what I mean by that is a lot of times we have these learned behaviors around food. For instance, I'll give you an example. Unfortunately, it's not a holiday related example. But for me, growing up in my family, going to the movies was like a very routine thing that my family and I did. And so my mom was a very like almond mom term. I don't know if you guys know what that is, but basically she just followed like every fad diet and trend that was popular in the magazines. And so at one point she like banned sugar from our household and all these things. But whenever we'd go to the movie theaters, she'd let us get like one type of candy. And so for me, my favorite is Sour Patch Kids. And so my brain started associating the movie theater with a place of reward and treats, because that was the only place that I could, have the candy that I enjoyed. And so what happened is anytime that I'd go to the movie theater without even thinking about it, and this is into my adult years too, I'd go to the movie theater and instinctively go get a bag of candy and eat it in the theater and then feel not the best afterwards sometimes. And so there was one time I was in a movie theater. I'd gone out to dinner beforehand. I was pretty full from the dinner, did a little overeating. And then I, ordered the candy and I was sitting there and I was eating it and I got a really bad stomach ache. And I was like, why am I eating this? I'm full. I don't want this. And now my stomach hurts and I can't even focus on the movie. Like, why am I doing this? And that made me realize that like, oh crap, this is a learned behavior. This is something that my body has just, or my brain more so, has associated with. It's, the movie theater equals candy. And so a lot of times, so that is a reaction to the food stimulus or to the stimulus itself. So, my reaction was I go to the movie theater, my brain goes, ooh, candy. Reactively, I get candy and then I eat candy and then I don't feel good afterwards. But by learning to respond to food, which is pausing beforehand and kind of just assessing what I want, it allows for better decisions. So basically what I had to start doing to kind of unlearn that behavior is when I'd go to the movie theaters, I'd ask myself, do I actually want candy right now? And sometimes I wasn't sure, and that was okay. But the point was stopping to ask myself, is this something that I actually want? And so I'd ask myself that. And if the answer was pretty clear, like, you know what, no, I'm pretty good. Great. I went in, was able to enjoy the movie without focusing on it. But if I couldn't tell, then I'd be like, okay, well, let's get it. And I'll have, maybe 3 or so and see how I feel after that. Because when we start responding and pausing instead of just having reactive based actions, it allows us to be in control of the outcome that we want. Because a lot of times, I feel like as a nutritionist, it's not my role to tell you what you can and can't eat because you're a grown adult. I'm not your mom. I'm not here to tell you what you can and can't have, but instead I'm here to coach you on how to make those decisions for yourself so you learn how to eat for your own body and your own goals. And so a lot of that comes from just taking ownership of your actions. So, for Thanksgiving, let's say you think about what you want. You do that, responding based thought process instead of reacting to the food at Thanksgiving. So let's say it's the night before Thanksgiving and you ask yourself, what do I want out of this meal this year? And that could be to, be mindful of your caloric intake and choose healthier foods and, try and stop when you're content and not overeat. But for other people, it might be just enjoying the food and being present and not focusing and eating whatever. And whatever you come up with as what you want to focus on, I then encourage you to ask yourself next, am I okay with the consequences that can come from this? And I don't mean consequences in a negative way, but so for instance, with the first example, if you choose to focus on, more healthy eating and, hitting a calorie amount and your goals more so, are you okay with the consequences of maybe Aunt Sally's going to make remarks about you not eating enough and that might make you feel uncomfortable? Or maybe you don't eat all of your favorite foods and that might make you sad temporarily. So just kind of assessing the outcome, that the output that comes from the input, am I okay with that? And on the opposite side, if you choose to, not be mindful or just eat whatever, are you okay with the fact that your digestion might be slightly off? You might weigh, you will weigh heavier the next day, mainly just from water retention, so don't panic if the scale is up the next day. And you might just feel sluggish and not the best. If you're okay with that outcome, then just own up to the choice that leads to that and enjoy it and move on. But if you're not okay with the outcome, then it's back to the drawing board to assess, how do I become okay with this outcome? And so a lot of it is preemptively thinking about yourself in the future. And as you practice this skill and as you develop it, it becomes more second nature to where you don't have to put as much thought or planning into it. But in the beginning stages, just like any other skill, it takes time to learn it. And so in regards to guilt, because I feel like guilt is heavily wrapped around holidays and things like that with eating, remember that the Thanksgiving celebration specifically is literally about food. So enjoying holiday foods is part of the celebration and that's okay. So, try and focus on the moment. So when you choose to indulge or have your favorite foods or whatever you want to call it, truly experience it. Notice the flavors, the textures, the sensations. Remind yourself that you deserve to enjoy your food and not just shovel it in your mouth and not even taste it because you inhaled it so fast. Pair wisely. If you are having a dessert, pair it with a healthy component like fruit or a little bit more protein during your dinner, or maybe skipping on alcohol, So just think about, once again, how's this choice going to affect me and am I okay with that effect? And then of course, like I kind of talked about earlier, practicing self-compassion. That goes such a long way. So if you do overindulge, acknowledge it without judgment and move forward with your next meal as an opportunity to get back on track. We can get out of that headspace of, I messed up my diet today, so I'll get back on track tomorrow, or I'll get back on track Monday, or I'll get back on track January 1st. Choice after the one that you were unhappy with, you have the opportunity to choose better for yourself. So if you end up having a meal after Thanksgiving, let's say you get home from the Thanksgiving dinner and it's 6 p.m. and you are genuinely hungry, okay, eat some food, but focus on choices that allow you to feel better. And once again, get curious, why did I overindulge? How did that make me feel? Bringing awareness to what choices make us feel like garbage and what choices make us feel great is a really easy way to start making better choices, because innately we're designed to not want to feel bad. We want to feel good. We want to feel healthy. And it's just a lot of times we lack the awareness to identify what's causing that because we just live in such a go, go, go world where we're constantly distracted. We're constantly on screens. We're running around all these things. It's very hard to slow down and just be in the moment. And then, just kind of lastly, some things to help out. Staying hydrated for sure. So many people do not drink enough water. And so what I would recommend is, first thing in the morning, have some water, with your breakfast, have some water, because hydration is more than just quenching thirst. It's a fundamental to overall well-being. Our body's 70% water. But it also helps with controlling appetite. It helps with supporting digestion, and it also helps maintain energy levels too. So by having adequate water intake during the day leading up to holidays and things like that, it just helps your body navigate food better and also use the food better and process it out. So definitely keep drinking water. Another thing too, we're going to get just a tad bit sciencey right now, but a lot of times when we eat, or how do I want to explain this? So for every 1 gram of carbohydrate that you eat, your body holds on to 3 to 4 grams of water. And the reason for this is, so carbs break down into glucose, and glucose is the energy that our cells use. However, if we eat more carbs than the amount of energy that we need in that moment, it then gets stored as glycogen. So once again, we eat carbs, it gets converted into glucose. Glucose is the active form of energy. It goes to our cells, and then the remaining amount that we don't need gets stored as glycogen, usually in our liver first, and then our muscles, and then eventually our fat cells. But we're just going to focus on the liver for the sake of this example. And so what happens is, let's say it's Thanksgiving dinner. Let's say your body needs, I'm not the best at mental math, so we're going to keep the numbers pretty simple. Let's say your body needs 50 grams of carbs for the energy that it needs to do whatever it's trying to do. But you have 100 grams of mashed potatoes. So those mashed potatoes, 100 grams that you eat, 50 of it is going to be converted into glucose, and it's going to go to the cells that need the energy, and it's going to do what it's meant to do. The other 50 grams is going to get stored in your liver, and it's going to get stored as glycogen. But remember, it's 3 to 4 grams of water per every 1 gram of carbs. So if you have 50 grams of carbs hanging out in your liver, you're also going to have 150 grams of water stored in your body too, to be used to process that out. So in order to turn glycogen back to glucose, you need the water molecules to essentially just switch it back. And so your body kind of balances this out. It's like, okay, we've got the 50 grams of carbs in here, we need 150 grams of water, and it tries to keep the water in your body to help process those carbs out. But if we're not drinking enough water, then the carbs can't be released for energy purposes, and it stays stored in the liver. But the liver can also only hold so much in it before it starts telling the body like, nope, liver's capped out, parking's full here, go to muscles, go to fat cells. And so then what happens is if we're not drinking enough water to support moving the glycogen back to glucose, then the next time that we need energy, instead of just taking it from the stores or your storage, the liver will be like, we can't release it. We don't have enough water. So then either what happens is your body starts extracting water from other places, like your colon. I promise you don't have like poop water floating around your body, but there is water in your feces in your colon, and your body will actually extract it out. It does kind of filter it, but so it'll either take water from your body and use it to release those carbs, or it'll just say, you know what? We don't even have enough water there, just eat more carbs and it'll be fine. And then you keep building up a storage of carbs that keep requiring more water. And this is a lot of times where bloating comes from, where scale fluctuations come from, because you just have water retention that your body is trying to hold on to while still, using it for the systems that need it, but also holding on to it to process those carbs out. So ensuring you have enough water can really help with preventing water retention and bloating too. And also, holidays, big time for drinking. So if you are someone who drinks, alcohol is a diuretic, meaning it just increases urine output and can lead to dehydration. And so then this dehydration essentially contributes to hangovers and, also amplifies feelings of fatigue and sluggishness. And so what I would recommend, for every alcoholic drink that you have, just consider having a glass of water to help kind of mitigate its dehydrating effects. And then lastly, main tip here is just stay moving. I'm not saying you have to go, do a CrossFit workout or, go run a marathon or something, but kind of view movement during the holidays as not like a rigid workout routine or punishment for indulgences. I promise you, you don't have to burn off the food that you eat, but it's more so about celebrating what your body can do, because engaging in physical activity not only reduces stress, but it also, supports healthy digestion and naturally boost your energy levels too. So that can kind of help you combat that holiday slump. So, walking after eating is a great way to support your digestive system. So if you're going to a family outing, maybe after the meal, suggest that you guys go for a nice little walk, 10, 15 minutes. It doesn't have to be anything crazy. Take the opportunity to do more fun outdoor activities. I don't know what weather's like where you all live, but, maybe ice skating or, sledding or things like that can be fun too. And, also, do some stretching or, just things to move your body to help process the food out, but also help regulate your nervous systems as well. So that once again, you can make better informed decisions with food, because stress management, sleep, water intake, food intake, exercise levels, and emotional health, all those things play a role into how we make decisions around food. Excuse me, I'm going to take a sip of water real quick since we're talking about water. Okay, excuse me. And then kind of lastly, try to release food guilt. This is one that's easier said than done and definitely takes some practice, but this is really the heart of everything. You know, one meal will not erase your progress. I mean, shit, even 3 meals will not erase your progress. But what derails a lot of people is that shame spiral afterwards, staying in that negative feedback loop, staying in that binge restriction cycle, that all or nothing cycle. And it's because food guilt is such a powerful and destructive emotion that like goes far beyond a momentary feeling of regret. You know, it triggers all these vicious cycles of the restrictive eating followed by overeating or full-on binge eating, you know, which then reinforces the guilt. And then we start staying in this negative headspace thinking that we can't do anything and that something's wrong with us and that, you know, we've got shame and we have self-criticism. And so not only does that suck for our like mental and emotional well-being, but it also undermines our physical health and the progress that we aim to make towards a balanced lifestyle. You know, your health was not made in one day, so it's also not going to be lost in one day. Excuse me, you know, think about this, like one day out of 365 days is only like 0.0069%. And, you know, so that percentage, I promise you, will not mess with your overall progress towards health and wellness. You know, if you are someone who is tracking your weight and things like that right now, yeah, the scale might be up the day after Thanksgiving, but once again, I doubt it's because you ate enough to gain a pound of fat. It actually takes a decent amount of food consumption, roughly about like 3,500 calories on top of where your maintenance amount of calories are is to gain a pound of fat. So chances are if the scale's up the next day, it's probably because you had more sodium, you have water retention, your digestion's messed up, because the scale measures everything in your body, not just fat. You know, it measures digestion of your bowel movements, of your urine. It measures bone density. It measures muscle mass, fat mass, water mass. And so all of those things can cause fluctuations on the scale. So if the scale is up, once again, take some deep breaths, try and regulate the nervous system so you can make rational decisions. And just ask yourself what could have caused that, you know, and reflect on, well, I did have some, you know, sodium. I did have maybe an alcoholic beverage. So yeah, the scale's up temporarily, but that doesn't mean that I'm a failure. And that doesn't mean that I have to beat myself up into a self-sabotaging mindset where I stay in this stuck cycle. And, you know, a lot of the times, like the spiral normally begins after an individual like perceives that they failed their dietary rules that they have for themselves or eaten something like bad. And so this perceived failure leads to feelings of just that intense guilt and shame. And so instead of motivating positive change, these negative emotions trigger like that what the hell effect. Like, I've already ruined everything. You know, so I might as well just keep going. Like, what's the point? I'll just start over New Year's. And then we all know how that story goes. We never stick to it. New Year's, you know, like Ty was saying at the beginning, we want to make action now that supports us and our goals because we deserve to go into the new year already working towards that better version of ourselves. And so some things to kind of like reframe, you know, if you're someone who says stuff like, I'm so bad for eating all that dessert, like I've ruined my diet, I've ruined my goals. Try maybe, hey, I enjoyed that dessert and it was part of a special occasion, and one dessert does not define my entire eating pattern. So I'll just focus on nutrition choices for my next meal. You know, something that helps with the women that I work with is whenever they are talking negatively to themselves, I just ask them, hey, would you talk to the 5-year-old version of you like this? Would you talk to a friend? Would you talk to a loved one like this? And I've never had anybody say yes. Everyone's always said no. And so then it's like, okay, so if you wouldn't talk to that younger version of yourself like that, if you wouldn't talk to a family member or a friend like this, then why the hell are you talking to yourself like this? You are the only person in your whole life that's always going to be with you. Your body is the only place you will ever live. You are the only person who's always going to have your back no matter what. So why the hell are you talking to yourself like you're some piece of shit? Because you're not. And remember, change starts with how we talk to ourselves, with how we perceive ourselves, with how we relate to ourselves. So choose to relate to yourself better. Choose to be kinder to yourself. And just remember to be compassionate towards yourself and be curious about the choices that you're making and be mindful and intentional with that. And, you know, it's a good time, or use the holidays as just a time to figure out, how can I eat that lets me feel my best? And once again, if you don't know the answer to that in the time, it's okay. But the fact that you're starting to like ask yourself these things is bringing heightened awareness. It's bringing more mindfulness into your decision making when it comes to food. And this bleeds into so many other aspects of your life too. And so, kind of remind yourself at the end of the day, it's food. It's going to be used in our body, and it's going to be used to support us, and it's going to be used to nourish us in the way that our body knows how to do it. And we always have our next meal to choose better. And so, as you have probably been seeing on the screen, I wanted to have something to support you guys, kind of leaving this and going into the holiday season. So I put together a free 7-day healthy habits for the holidays challenge, where it's essentially everything that I talked about today is going to be like, oh my gosh, so I've been talking for like 2 hours and I'm getting okay. It's going to be compartmentalized into habit stacking actions that you can follow and learn in these 7 days to hopefully get you into a better headspace going into the holidays, so that not only do you feel better and you eat better, but you also just start treating yourself better. So if you want to join that, the little link there, it is free. And we do start tomorrow because we are action takers in this group. We want better for ourselves. And it's very easy to follow. So if you do sign up for that, you will get access to my coaching app that I use where the challenge will take place. You'll get access to that tomorrow. And then we start the challenge and you have me in your corner for the next 7 days, cheering you on, helping you out. And in addition to that too, if you filled out, I don't know if the other link has been popping up with the...
I'm gonna add it there again. Add it back up just now. So if everyone really quickly click on this link, I'll give you guys a couple more seconds. We'll go 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And I'm gonna put up another link right now. This one is a special gift from Nat to all of you guys. Only for the MITM Club members and the Beast Camp members that are here. You click this link and you'll get some more gifts from Nat, right? So make sure you guys click both the links, drop your info in there. Because we want to really make a transformation before New Year's. We want to really start to take our power back now. And the best way to do that is to just start now. So I'm trying to get as many tools and resources as I can get you guys. And that is an absolutely amazing. I mean, you guys got to spend the last hour and a half with her. Y'all know she's amazing. Click the link, guys.
Yeah, please, even if you don't want to do the challenge or you're not ready for that yet, totally fine. But definitely sign up for the gifts, because the holidays are a hard time, whether, emotionally, food-wise, financially. The holidays are tough, and I want to try and help support you guys the best that I can. And just, kind of remind you that you're not alone in this and you can choose better for yourself. So those gifts are structured around offering you some support to help you with your mindset going into the holidays. Because like I said, it can be a hard time for people, and I want you all to be supported in this journey of yours.
So now, quick question. How can folks find you, connect with you, or follow you? What's the best way for them to connect with you?
It is through Instagram. I'm technically on TikTok too, but honestly, I don't really post on there much at all, but I'll put it in the chat. I am Nat Coaches, pretty straightforward on Instagram. So you can follow me there and we can chat there. If you have any questions, definitely please shoot me some there. I'd love to connect with you all on social media and hear like what your biggest takeaway was or what you plan to implement. And like I said, I would love to be in your guys' corner and help support you during this time. So if you follow me on Instagram, I can follow you back and we can keep that conversation going and help you out.
Okay, so Nat, thank you so much for joining us. I really appreciate you. I know that even from our first conversation and watching this and experiencing it, I've learned a lot and I was reminded of a lot. Sometimes we need to be reminded more than we need to learn new things, but I still learn new things, I know everyone here got some value. So with that being said, y'all, this is the first webinar since our break, since our little hiatus. We're going to be bringing this back once every 2 weeks, every Sunday. It's our new time, Sunday from 5 o'clock until 7 o'clock roughly. So make sure you guys stay tapped in. Thank you so much for joining. I love the energy, right? I want to see you guys actually using these gifts from Nat. Let me actually drop this in the one more time. This is the healthy day one, but this is the free gift that's just for you guys that are here. No one else is getting access to this. So make sure you guys tap in and Nat's going to send you guys over some exclusive gifts. But with that being said, thank you again. Stay blessed by the best. And we'll see y'all very soon. Have a good one.
Bye. Thank you, everybody.